Oh,
just
nice.
put this on my
I see.
YouTube.
Am
so
I
we
closer
want
to the
add some
middle, or are we good here?
Yeah, it's fine. If you want to just start off.
Okay, cool. So, what's the topic of discussion today?
I'm Pilleater, and I'm joined with
Kashif.
of Meadowright
Yeah.
Project. It's a Facebook group, and it's pretty much also going to be a Discord once you get to it, right?
Right. We have Discord now, but yeah, it's pretty nascent.
That's interesting because I only really got into the whole Discord scene when I was earlier this year when my friends from the Jersey Goys actually just said get into the whole Discord scene, and some other friends told me, and then I found out about your place, and pretty much it's all been recent too, and I just graduated from college, and so it's amazing what you can do in the social networking from Discord, and maybe just talk more what you actually do, because I'm kind of I don't know exactly what Meadowright's about. So.
Sure. It is amazing that. Real quick, when did you graduate from high school? College, rather.
Last year, December 2016.
Oh, 2016. Okay, cool. I'm class of 2006.
Okay.
So, yeah, I actually dropped out of... so we're here on the Penn campus. We're actually in the economics building. Found a little computer lab to sneak into. I graduated from high school in 2002. Native of Philly, born on the Jersey Shore, Ocean City, New Jersey.
Oh, Ocean City. It's a great place.
Great place, yeah. I was born in...
I was a teenager when I was there. So.
Yeah, I was born in Somers Point. It's a very idyllic town right across the... There's like a little bridge there.
Yeah.
And I graduated from high school in 2002 and entered Swarthmore College.
Swarthmore.
Yeah, the main line. It's next to Bryn Mawr.
Is that originally a women's school? Swarthmore?
No, that's Bryn Mawr.
Okay, Bryn Mawr is the women's school.
Yeah, so there's a trico there in the county. I forget the county name, but yeah, Delaware County. They're called the Delaware County Tri-Cooperative, which is Bryn Mawr College, Haverford.
Villanova has the
Swarthmore.
same thing with Eastern, Rosemont, I think Haverford.
Lehigh maybe?
Yeah, Rosemont, Villanova does the same thing, but I know what you're talking about.
Got it. No, awesome. So yeah, I kind of went to college there. At the time, I grew up. My parents are from Pakistan. Ethnically, I'm Punjabi. Pakistan has like 4 or 5 ethnicities, and it really is. I mean, if you listen to Jared Taylor and some of those people talk, it is true. Once you jump into India, you're jumping from race to race. It's really like being in Africa, even if you're.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I've yet to go, but I don't know.
Yeah, like I can meet someone at the Dunkin' Donuts. Those people tend to be Gujaratis. They are a really different people. You know what I mean? It's just like Nigeria. I think they speak like 200 languages. I mean, some of those ethnic groups are very fine, but you can really see it when you jump from country to country. Like a lot of the Ethiopians, they look Indian. I have seen Ethiopians, and I thought they were Egyptian. But yeah, I dropped out of Swarthmore after 3 semesters, and I came to Penn, switched to Penn, and after a few years, I left this college too. I did really well at Penn. I would have graduated, whatever you call it, with the highest honors. So I was pre-med at the time, and what happened is toward the end of my academic career in college. I had a serious personal crisis with. I began to question how we were taught things, and this was as someone who, my background is, my parents are Punjabi or whatever, but my background is Protestantism. I believe my parents were converted from whatever religion they were, and I know, as far back as it seems to be Christian or Protestant. I stayed very close to my church. I grew up in a Mennonite church, so pretty German. Yeah, one of the few.
Well, when I went to church, I went to Pentecostal.
Oh, nice.
And I didn't get into it, but the Pentecostal scene was very weird with speaking in tongues. And
yeah.
Stuff, but it only lasts for 2 years.
Yeah, it's kind of.
But I went there during college, so.
Got it. Yeah, it's kind of the diametric opposite of German Anabaptism, which is very stoic. It's a very low context culture. And I had a serious kind of a question was. I began to see that, Christianity didn't explain everything in terms of the external world. I mean, you're talking about deconstructionism, the people, what I call the secular world, live that every day. And we were very conservative.
How old were you?
I was 22, 21,
okay.
Yeah. And I began to really question, like how, not only was I questioning Christianity, I was questioning how things in the secular world were done as well. Like it just seemed to be very, what we would call now postmodernism, or a linguistically backed paradigm of reality. It didn't seem accurate.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
The Christian world is not in tone with the materialistic world, where there's a facade right now of certain narratives, but the outside reality doesn't mix in with it.
Exactly. And then when I came to the outside reality, meaning the material reality, the world of the physical, I quickly realized that it did not seem to explain its own existence. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's a real issue, actually, and I found that in the alt-right, is that a lot of people are just, it seems like they're unsatisfied with a linguistic paradigm of reality. You know what I mean? That seems to be their main concern.
For criticisms of the alt-right?
No, for criticisms, or it's the alt-right looking at the outside world.
I think I know what you're talking about, where the alt-right is very... Right now, the current philosophy is an ethno-state, and that means the practice of ethno-nationalism, which will predate the postmodern liberal regime.
Right.
And it's not really thought out. The only thing is just new segregation. And,
exactly.
That usually comes from my own... I have a criticism on that theory, too, because what are you going to do with bicultural people?
Right.
Only people like Greg Johnson from Countercurrents that said, well, there's an amnesty argument.
Yeah.
If whites won't take someone who's half Asian, you might as well give them back to the Chinese.
Right.
And then they're Chinese, but it does nothing to do with a Eurasian background.
Yeah.
And yet I think there should be, if the ethno-nationalist policy was set through, it's got to be bicultural, too.
Yeah, that's something that really struck me, because I meet a lot of people who are multicultural, like mixed in the alt-right. I met so many. I met like quarter black.
I used to lie and say I was Eurasian on YouTube just to get... subscribers.
Wow.
But then I made a video saying, guys, I'm not Japanese. Yeah, people would believe it, and some of the most prominent people believed it, but it was a way because people are that shallow that if your roaming millennial says something, then they'll believe her. But just because she's a hot Japanese white girl, so or Chinese, I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the turning point for me was... I dropped out of college for 10 years. I was just like I had basically, some of these colleges, I mean, like, you think about Rosemont to the max, like Swarthmore. Like, Swarthmore is a very elite liberal arts college. Like, my background in...
I only knew one friend, but she went there for Japanese at Swarthmore. But that's the only thing I've ever heard of it.
Yeah. So, the thing is that, here's the thing. My background in postmodernism was stellar. And the thing is, I began to kind of wander, because I didn't grow up like a whole lot, like you could say, like in the suburbs. And so I began to kind of wander the poor neighborhoods of Philadelphia and question, why things were the way they were. And at the same time, I was kind of total political junkie. My dad was, so I got it from him. And one of the things that really struck me, because I used to talk to some of these people on the internet, like this is before the alt-right. I mean, the nationalist community, I mean, they've always found a home on the internet. And a great analogy is actually like porn. Like, they're always the first to adopt DVD, you know what I mean? They're the first to whatever. It's kind of the same way with ethno-nationalism. They're the first to adopt new platforms because they're just more libertarian. They get to operate outside of the purview of regulation, so to speak. What I found was that, and forgive me if I'm taking too long, just let me know. What I found was that it seemed to be that a lot of the separation between like the different groups, because I worked in one of the most dangerous areas of Philadelphia, Kensington and Allegheny. It's kind of the Skid Row. Yeah, I mean, it's a very bizarre, it's like you're in a movie. It's like you're in Collateral or something. I was a limo driver nights for 6 months there, for 8 months. It was a very fascinating, very eye-opening, and to see how you had the different groups there. You had the white side, then you had the black side, generally separated by Frankfurt Avenue. And they mixed a lot, too. They just did. I mean, you're poor, It's like running out of forest fire. Everyone, you know what I mean? They drop all normal apprehensions. But it seemed like every group was dealing with poverty in a different way. I met just a lot of, and this is before it got national attention, a lot of white women seem to be struggling with opioid addiction. We talk about it a lot now, but I saw it on the street, a lot of... and for on the black side, it seemed to be a lot of like interviolence issues, like somebody has a problem with you, disrespected somebody. It's kind of like Chicago on a small scale. You know what I mean? It's like what those loyalties to your whatever, your block, run deep, and it seemed as if there was a whole situation here. Well, basically, what happened is I felt as if the government had abandoned the entire. You know what I mean? I could clearly see that the problem had outrun the solution.
The people just exist there as like consumers, but they don't care about the life of the progression of the livelihood. Or
exactly. I saw that there were programs to help people, and one of the things is that when you're there, you learn not to judge people. And I certainly had, I learned to walk the streets without fear, so to speak. You know what I mean? Because you could look there and say, well, why is that person standing there? But they could be looking the same at you. You know what I mean? So you realize, well, I guess it's a mutual truce. I began to see that the problem had really outrun the solution, meaning like you had Section 8, you had WIC, which is women, infants, children, on the white side, which I think was mostly Irish, and then you had the Polish, they were at the bar, they had their bar culture. The Irish, it's a stereotype, but they congregate around that. And again, I mentioned the opioid addiction, and I began to see. I said, "Oh, this is like a potential." And I really used to use those words back then, and I have it even written up to like 2011 because that's when I worked there. I said, "This is a recipe for fascism." I used to say it right away, I think, because I said, America doesn't have a solution like Israel, where if Jews decide, hey, I'm not going to practice my religion, I can still be Jewish. You know what I mean? I mean, now, legitimately, I would come from the standpoint that Jews are a people. Like, I know it's, people in the alt-right have different positions, but, there's a culture there.
The only position right now in the alt-right is just move them to Israel.
Yeah.
And that there's no diaspora Jews, they got to make up their mind, or otherwise they'll be freezed out of society.
Exactly. And I began to see some problems with post-Christianism. In other words, the idea is that, if you leave your religion, Christianity, you see, and I saw so many young people, naturally, they saw that Christianity did not explain everything in postmodernism. Postmodernism was this huge circle, and Christianity was this little circle within it. You know what I mean? So people could just wander outside. And I began to realize that, like, Christians are disproportionately paying the price for postmodern confusion. They don't have anything to protect their identity if they, God forbid, decide to stop practicing their religion. Whereas with the Jewish kids, they had a lot of organization. Admirably, I began to see Israel as kind of a country ahead of its time. You know what I mean? It's almost like in the 1800s.
Well, it's kind of answering the Jewish question as well.
Yeah, they answered it for themselves, almost. Like, I'm Jewish, here's my answer. Because in the 1800s is kind of when the era of the kings began to close and the era of the merchants or trade began. And I mean, even in Jewish history, you can see it. It's just almost like the Quakers. Observant Judaism nearly died. I mean, they became so absorbed into white Anglo-Saxon Protestant whatever culture in Britain. That's why fascists call them the eternal Anglos, because they were able to find something outside of observant Judaism. And I began to see that in the early 2000s that Christians still have not developed a solution like that for themselves. And that's when, in 2010, 2011, having never heard of the alt-right, I heard about it in 2015 when I first ran into them on Facebook. Obviously a very dominant force.
Well, actually, it's funny. My history of the alt-right goes back all the way to 2009,
wow.
2008. I was in skinhead music, and I was interested in Screwdriver and No Remorse and Brutal. I knew them all, but I only remember Countercurrents in 2010, and before that, there was Voice of Reason Radio Network with the Stark Truth and Keith Preston and some other fringe lunatics that are part of the alt-right. But that's interesting that 2015 is the alt-right era where everyone knows it now.
Yeah, that is right, because the election was coming up. Trump had announced, I'm going to run. He announced over the summer. And then they also invaded my platform of choice, which was Facebook. It's just, I have always preferred to interact with normal people. You know what I mean? I know about the FAR scene. I stayed on Facebook, and, that's when I slowly learned about the alt-right towards the end of 2015. And it was like the fascist movement I had predicted, that back in 2011. I think actually, Richard Spencer made his alt-right blog in 2010, but I saw that the problems of post-Christianism and that postmodernism is a very, very Jewish system. And I don't mean like Jewish like in necessarily a... what I mean is it's a linguistically backed system. It doesn't really solve Christians' aesthetic conundrums. And what happens is, and again, not making any broad global conspiracy theories, but if you are a Christian and you leave your religion, you become fodder for postmodernism, material deconstructionism, i.e. material deconstructionism. Tinder, right. Material nihilism.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've been talking about just in snippets the last 3 weeks is on Facebook is, why does the far right have such a contentious relationship with women? Like, it's just like, they just don't, like, it's just like, they just can't come to grips with their existence.
The biological nature between man and woman.
Exactly.
Well, it's really funny. When I was 23, there was a countercurrents meeting in Philadelphia. F. Roger Devlin was there. He has a book, Sexual Utopia and Power. And a lot of those theories, when I was learning about biology, came from Devlin. I was pretty much the only one to bring my Chinese girlfriend in a room of full white nationalists. But I just think that Devlin's theory is so dominant, not even beyond MGTOW, but every single person on the alt-right is subscribed to Devlin's theory on sexual utopia and power.
Cool. I'll definitely research his book. I'll look it up. But but one of the things I've been theorizing is that, because Kurt Doolittle, this guy you read about on Facebook a lot, he started his own, 5 years before me. He started Propertarianism, right? He does discuss how Marxism is very appealing to women. It becomes that way, and he talks about its incentives and its a lot of things. I think ultimately women have a more linguistic view of reality. You know what I mean? And that dovetails with Marxists, a lot of groups, people of color. I would argue that Judaism is the worship of language. There, the word was God, and I think that I began to realize that Christians are in deep trouble, and I didn't have the language to describe it back in 2011 when I was working nights in Kensington and Allegheny. But basically, our consciousnesses are becoming fodder for postmodernism.
It's really odd because I was very critical of postmodernism, especially at my last years at college. I had a Marxist professor who was really in depth with it, and he loved the typical Foucault, Derrida, Lacan, Deleuze. They're all French. They basically all argue in this 80s period that the world will be egalitarian and everything is relative. If you think about it, postmodernism is pretty much just the modernist system of Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, but it's modernism for everyone. And that sounds very similar to a communist system, redistributing modernism for everyone. If you think of that in terms, then you start to think about what makes, then if it's modernism for anything, the homeless black person can be a poet, or a Bazooka Joe rapper is somehow philosophy, like, what's that stupid book, White Noise by Dom? White Noise by Dom. I forget, it's flowing out my, but what I'm saying is there is definitely, postmodernism has these two problems, cultural irony and eclecticism, or this ideal of deracination and just no one's taking any sincere. And we seem to be living in an age of irony,
Exactly, and a lot of this irony is stemming from material deconstructionism, which is really existential deconstructionism. You jump on these apps and you're destroying your soul, and that's somehow you're like on the altar of postmodernism.
And normies, we call normies, and the normie peoples and normal Chads, hetero boys, and Stacys, hetero girls, are all on Snapchat or Tinder or whatever new app comes to make money every 3 years in our generation. It's people, if you want to get in the system of it's now a computer program, which is ironic because it seems like 10 years ago there once was Facebook, and 15 it was MySpace. It seemed like only nerds would be using this. But now people have these miniature computer phones, and you could just go onto it and be in the net. And it's like this whole cyberpunk reality. But at the same, but like you said about deconstruction, I just wanted to make that one little digression, is that I find that deconstruction is the most abusive and not because I studied English, and they say, well, deconstruction is good. For example, if there is a group of islanders that's learning about a celebrity, but they only put it in their tongue, Therefore, you should deconstruct them to find authentic truth.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happens when you start deconstructing a person you don't like?
Yeah.
You start deconstructing it because it's traditional values.
Right.
And you start... It's literally a tear down. It's like it's anarchy as an ideology. And I can't believe the system will try to legitimize deconstruction as a value. And I always had problems with that. But some people say whether the alt-right is deconstructing the deconstructors. Because deconstructors will say, you can't deconstruct Derrida because we're doing the good thing. And then when you start to realize you can't deconstruct liberal, it's an infinite cycle. Ouroboros, the snake that eats itself or something.
Exactly. So, quick, I guess this kind of dovetails neatly into... so my background, I mean, I studied in... I majored in psychology briefly at Swarthmore, biology here. I was thinking I was going to be pre-med or whatever, a little stereotypical. But my true strength, like my background, is writing. And what I began to realize, and that's how I became a critic of postmodernism. Without having the language, in 2008, I didn't even know what postmodernism was. But yet here, I was criticizing.
I tried to criticize postmodernism. I remember the first time was in... I criticized it when I was 21 earlier, and I remember I was a pro-Palestinian because I didn't like the Israeli Jewish-controlled system. Now that sounds anti-Semitic, but a lot of people were pro-Palestinian because it was a way to...
It was a very edgy thing to do. Right, I remember...
I was into that when I was 19, 20, but I slowly became criticizing postmodernism when I was 21. I remember writing... about Jack Donovan's book, Androphilia, about why should gay people be left-wing all the time when there's right-wing gays.
Right.
And that's postmodernism says you're left-wing, you can't be right-wing because that's offensive because they're anti-egalitarianism.
Exactly.
But I like I said, I was very critical of postmodernism as well. So
exactly. So what happened is, so the thing is, here's the thing, I kind of see, I perceive the world through language, meaning I deconstruct it in the form of language or whatever. I don't deconstruct language per se. Rather, I deconstruct what I see or what I perceive in terms of language. It's just me. My background is writing, and it's very native to me. I was editor-in-chief of the literary magazine at my high school, Central High School, a bunch of things. I had a number of, I don't know how much validity this holds. I began to take it seriously later, but I had two teachers tell me, this is what I should be focusing on. Or a couple of them said, this is two different schools. One was Mennonite High School, the other was Central High School. So they both said, oh, you're the best student I ever taught. And flat out. And I was like, I didn't believe them. Because I didn't take myself seriously as a literary or author person or whatever. So I didn't develop those talents. What I began to notice more and more in 2015 in kind of the world, the postmodern world, was that... in the alt-right, I ran into the alt-right. I realized that they're beyond a postmodern level of irony. This was...
Postmodern.
Yeah, absolutely.
Digimodern.
Yeah, exactly. It was... Oh, wow. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. It was outside. It was hyper-real. And postmodernists have used that term, hyper-real, to actually describe the alt-right. That it has a kind of a hyper-real take. They call its memes hyper-real. And,
is this hyper-real, the album by Atari Teenage Riot? It's funny because my professor got mad at me because he wanted me to use an album that described deconstruction. The only album I could think of was 60 Second Wipeout by Atari Teenage Riot, and he was completely mad because he'd never heard of such a thing.
Right.
But I'm just saying, if music could be that unique, but hyper-real, that's a very interesting term. But again, the death of postmodernism will be ultimately the death of modernism in itself.
It will be. I would agree with that. So I began to think about it. It took me a year and a half. I finally, around 2017's summer, April, May, I moved back to Philadelphia, and I was thinking really hard. I was riding my scooter around Broad in Washington, thinking really hard, and I said, this irony, it can only be described aesthetically. There's no other way. And I began to do a lot of research on things like skeuomorphs, things like the kind of the limits of irony in postmodernism. And I began to put together terms and submit them to Urban Dictionary. Terms like ironic nihilism. Ironic nihilism is supposed to be the border of postmodernism. So once you cross ironic nihilism, you're outside of postmodernism. So I came up with this term, ideal ironicism. So ideal meaning aesthetic irony, like memes and so forth, because it was obvious that the memes were saying a lot more than could be described in language.
Yes.
I felt that way.
Well, because it shows you that the internet jokes, they often say the alt-right, as Hillary Clinton says, got Donald Trump in the office. And you start to realize that the internet is a Stammesdox of the hell that's going on. But it also shows you true that there are, I'm going to stretch this a bit, it's like that movie Revenge of the Nerds, where the nerd, the antisocial, introverted person, has the power. And normies, Chads and Stacys, try to emulate whatever the nerd's interest in vaporwave and this thing. And it's always going to have legitimate power to that authentic person who started. But the normies keep adapting to this and pretend they want to be in this authentic system of power. But again, that's interesting because that can undermine the institutions of higher academia, people who have institute, and it just shows you how much college is worthless because you have to realize that you can get more information on 4chan and cultural knowledge than your professor rambling about Derrida.
Yeah, absolutely. And I began to study a lot about aesthetics and its relationship with language itself. And I began to find myself disagreeing a little bit with Kurt Doolittle, the way he tries to deconstruct everything in terms of language. And so I built my own system on the side. I ended up calling it... Well, what happened is I gave a term to everything outside of postmodernism. I called it hypermodernism. And it's when aesthetic nihilism regurgitates the ironies that postmodernism hides or swallows or ingests. So if you think about deconstructionism or consumerism or all these things, existential nihilism, it absorbs a lot of ironies. I mean, it manifests them existentially, yes, but it's because it has absorbed them. You know what I mean? And I began to realize that aesthetics was actually manifesting or regurgitating a lot of these ironies more efficiently than postmodernism. And I made a term for that, and the term is called hypermodernism. And I made that term, I think it's on Urban Dictionary, if I pull it up real quick.
I've heard the term being used before by a friend, and I liked hypermodernism, that the definition that the internet has something a lot to do with it.
It does. Absolutely.
That's meaning, and if you said it was making fun of postmodernism, then I think my only criticism is if we get away from this rhetoric of philosophical, like modernism, this and that, it just shows you, by the end of the day, it seems to be a classical Chinese conflict where there's an older generation and there's a younger generation going afterwards. It seems to me, if you take this rhetoric away, it seems to me hypermodernism would be an argument against older people. These older fuddy-duddy people who grow up.
Exactly. Here's the thing. I think hypermodernism is more than a deconstruction ism. I think it's a total collapse. It's a total collapse of... The thing with the postmodern generation is they grew up, and that would be me too, I guess. I'm the last of it. Grew up in an era where things were still physical.
Reaganomics.
Things were still physical. Things were still consumer. I mean, when everything's free on the internet, that really kind of throws a skewer into postmodernism.
That's right. You know, it's weird about here's my thing. I always think, I told this too, postmodernism seems to be the 80s generation.
Yes.
If you think about it. And it's not this universal thing that's going to last to the end of history. In fact, they were so full of themselves. Francis Fukuyama's The End of History, The End of the World. And it was being ended in the 90s. We listened to Nirvana and electronic music. It's also really funny because there's this arrogant pretentiousism to William Gibson's book, Neuromancer, because white people in America were so cucked to believe, well, Japan's just going to rule the world. And that's what's going to happen. Everything's going to be like Blade Runner. It didn't happen. It just seemed like Asian Aryanism happened, and this is an indoor joke. But it seems to me that there's this gullible nature on taking... It's just, I think it has something to do with the zeitgeist in the 80s generation, who are now in their 50s and 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. I was born in 83, so...
Maybe that's baby boomers, but maybe I would say parent, at least the 20, 30-year olders than millennials.
Absolutely. Yeah, we grew up in right, and they still see the world through that. And it's funny to watch postmodernists pretend, because I've seen a couple articles like that in Newsweek. One was in Newsweek, one I think was in Jacobin magazine. It was, postmodernism predicted Donald Trump. I'm like, no.
Well, that means that had been right-wing. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
I always have this argument against David Foster Wallace. I think he's a pretentious nutcase, and anybody who follows him, I think, is full of themselves, because the only thing he really has made is New Sincerity. And New Sincerity often argues, well, Donald Trump's going to be president. It's like New Sincerity is basically like Ted Cruz is Donald Trump. The reason why is because New Sincerity says, well, we got to go back to this modernist system and stop being so pretentious about being postmodern and put discipline. But if you're New Sincerity, you have to subscribe to Deleuze and Foucault and the whole progressive school of thought.
Exactly.
And that's why I never liked David Foster Wallace in any of his work, because you're Ted Cruz. I think the alt-right, even though you could say New Sincerity helped make right-wing interest, it's still not the same as Deaf and June or Boyd Rice.
Exactly. So I think of all the postmodern authors, I think unwittingly there is one author who, in his look at aesthetics, taking an aesthetic view of postmodernism, he stumbled onto a way out. That was Baudrillard. I don't know how to say it. Was it Jean Baudrillard? Mm-hmm. He wrote an essay called "Simulacra and Simulation."
That's right.
Yeah, and he talks about a completely skeuomorphic view of the world, in which,
I remember reading that briefly, just excerpts. It's been 2 years, but my example would be a McDonald's cheeseburger. People buy a McDonald's cheeseburger thinking it's going to be an actual cheeseburger, but it turns out the meat is borrowed from mixed animals, the bread is made in the factory, and it's not authentically a cheeseburger.
Right.
It has a simulacrum or something.
Right.
That's coming from my own knowledge.
Exactly. And the thing is that, honestly, he didn't really, he wrote it in the 70s. He, like a lot of the people who created postmodernism, they didn't have the advantage, they didn't have the heuristic of having gone through the new technologies. I mean, no one can really predict. Could I, in 2004, have predicted, the way technology would be now? No, not really. Do you know what I mean? I'm still amazed at Facebook.
It's like Frederick Brown argues, the market's going to be globalized. Well, no shit, Sherlock.
Exactly. Yeah, they take these mega trends, you know what I mean? They just say, well... So, he classified... He invented the term hyperreality, essentially. It's attributed to him. I mean, the whole simulacra and simulation, that was what it was about. He actually classified it as late-stage postmodernism, but I began to see that, at least from the aesthetic standpoint, like thinking like augmented reality, just a whole bunch of things, just the memes that were going around that contained so much more information that could be encapsulated in language. The kind of post-material nihilism, so to speak, that fell clearly outside of material deconstruction. That was a total collapse. I mean, a sudden, unpredictable. You know what I mean? It was unpredictable, and I began to realize that he was onto something aesthetically. That aesthetics were a way out of this crazy linguistic deconstructionist system of postmodernism. And I remember Greg Johnson and a few others talking about aesthetics, and I gave him a second look, you know what I mean, earlier this year. And I said, I think that I can say it in better terms. Because they do talk about the nature of consciousness. Obviously, there's a philosophical aspect to the far right. And it is very aesthetic. And I thought I could actually rephrase it in a lot better terms. What happened, I'm not sure how the segue occurred. I know it happened on the forums of Kurt Doolittle. But somebody asked me about metamodernism. And it just hit me as, hypermodernism, or this total collapse into a skeuomorph reality or augmented reality. This is not going to last forever. That's what we're entering right now, is kind of a hypermodern world in which things... It's almost like we're inside a TV show. Donald Trump is the...
That's what I've been saying, too. I had my senior project on I called it the alternative right, against political correctness. And my whole argument in the 60-page report, and doing research with other alt-right figures, was saying, the current trends continue in such decadence, well, the alt-right's going to get bigger. And I kind of made it as a warning sign to liberalism. Yeah. But as I was saying...
Well, the far right just won 2 days ago.
It's a narrative. People are living narratives. Your life is an anime.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be the protagonist to an anime nobody is watching.
Right, exactly.
And it's very scary in some way. And that's what I do in my own themes in my work.
Nice, neat. Yeah, no, I've seen the aesthetics on some of your work. There's a heavy focus on anime.
Well, yeah, I mean, just Jim Goad, Margaret Cho stuff, but that's just another street culture, and we could get into lowbrow art. But again, I'm worried about how the mindless person out in Kansas wants to go on the JET program or South Korea and just go away and think he's an anime character, when the actuality is this classic Martin Heidegger theory about how you're not authentic to who you are. You are
Right.
having a cognitive theory and kind of like a cyberpunk reality about thinking you're a blue-haired anime character. You're
Right.
living every day of your life
Right.
as what I call a psychosocial narrative of Erik Erikson.
Right.
He said about his psychosocial development. He said at certain ages in the psychology you have to question who you are.
Okay.
Certain paths going away. I borrow that term from Erik Erikson and call it the psychosocial narrative.
Right.
But exactly what you're saying seems in better terms of modernism. I'm just worried about how people, they don't want to uphold society, they just want to live in anime.
Right, and especially as I begin to research this aesthetic kind of theory of reality that that aesthetics explains kind of what life is like after postmodernism. I think you are seeing that people who would actually view themselves as sort of a protagonist in their own anime, they're actually going to gain more power, not only collectively, but subversively to postmodernism individually. And what I mean by that is we have here the rise of big data or data science, and a lot of the conclusions that big data comes up with, they were not predictable by linguistics alone. Data science is already taking down large portions, including Noam Chomsky's work of linguistics.
Well, because it's so egalitarian. And he says that you're born with it innately.
Exactly.
Therefore, everything's interchangeable.
Exactly. And oh my God, that was one of the big things that brought me over to the kind of this prediction of fascism. Is I used to volunteer around my Mennonite church was around like Girard and Broad, and that area used to be really bad 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just come from New Jersey, and all the kids, they couldn't read. Like they were like sixth grade.
Illiterate.
Illiterate. Yeah. And it took 10 years later, I did some research, and I predicted that Chomsky was behind it. And I read into Wikipedia.
He was trying to improve the lives of the illiterate by getting them higher education by saying that, well, they have it in them.
Yeah.
Right? Or, I don't know.
It was while they had learned sight reading, which was, so you think about like grammar rules and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously, you hear about stuff like, oh, well, good grammar is white privilege, this and that. That white privilege term is relatively
Well, also
new.
true. Most blacks in today's colleges, it's hard for them to do calculus. And because it's weird because in today's system, who needs calculus? It's just a preferred system. I don't know.
What I saw a lot is that, and this is, I'm like 12 years old. So I don't know anything. I never heard of Chomsky. I don't know anything about linguistics. All I know is I'm seeing these kids, half Puerto Rican, half black. I came from New Jersey, so I was like the only minority. I could read and everything, and I went to a Christian school. I come here, and they all go to public school, and they can't read. I said, what kind of travesty is this? Of course, I couldn't say it in those words, but I was definitely freaked out. And began to realize more and more that basically these socialists are taking minority kids and using them in their own personal experiment, because there's no way that white parents would stand for that.
It's like Dr. John Money, who took the kid and made the transsexual and get the transgender thing we have today.
Yeah,
it was one professor.
Exactly, and I began to see more and more this system that, because I fell into an ANCOM group when I was in San Francisco for 2 years. So it was weird how Marxists thought, even as they fought for people of color, that they could take your agency away and decide what you couldn't and couldn't do, or who you were and weren't. I mean, I was the only person of color practically in this ANCOM group. And they thought because they were representing equality, they could make rules. And of course, those rules fell harder on people who are from a poorer or, you know what I mean, background, more diverse background. And that fell so hard on these kids in North Philadelphia because there's no way people in the better school district or, what would be the more stereotypically white kids would have stood for their kids not learning grammar. You know what I mean? If you can read or write, you want your child to read and write. But these immigrants from Puerto Rico or the African Americans who had migrated from the South, they simply did not have that, quite literally, the privilege to fight back against the system. And their kids were literally human experiments in the 80s and early 90s for Noam Chomsky's system of sight reading. And so, you'd meet people who were like 13, 14 years old, and they could only read at a first and second grade level. And it was really maddening. You know what I mean? I began to read, when I saw the white poverty when I was working in 2011, realizing that these whites were being held down, and unlike the people of color, they knew things could be better because they knew things used to be better. I predicted, basically, I used to call it back then, I said, a pro-Israel fascist movement is going to come to America, where they are not going to be like David Duke and say Jews this, Jews that, I don't like Israel, I don't like Jews, Jews rule the world. They're going to be more nimble, and they're going to say, hey, we're going to do the same thing Israel's doing. That was my prediction back then.
You mean like Jews blaming that non-Jews?
Yeah, well, like white nationalism 1.0 has always had a very clumsy relationship with Jews. I mean,
Hollywood Nazism.
Yeah. I mean, Hitler, kind of set the tone very kind of ham-handedly. I mean,
and all the postmodernists would believe if you're far right, you must be a Hollywood Nazi.
Exactly right. Yeah, they have this stereotypical Hitler view, and they play on that a lot, which actually in 2 or 3 years is seriously going to play into the hands of the alt-right, because libertarians know better. So if libertarians have to choose between Marxism and the alt-right, I was just talking to a libertarian friend yesterday. He said, real libertarians don't like either group. But you make me choose.
They're a centrist, or there's some radical, artistic Sargon of Akkad who's like, I'm above it all. But I'm very, again, a digression here. I'm just very skeptical of people like Sargon of Akkad, is because they don't make up their mind. They think they could just be some role play in Greek society and somehow be an individual. And normie people believe that, who think they're smart, but really this is just a case of low IQ because they're not upholding adult responsibility.
Exactly. The thing is that skepticism is not an answer to postmodernism. It's just part of postmodernism.
It's like David Foster Wallace bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just part of postmodernism. So what happened is I began touting this theory of postmodernism in 2015, and I developed it, and there's a bunch we could talk about it. But what happened is eventually, I realized that was not the end. There's something that's going to come after that. I called it metamodernism. And meta means, self-reference, infinite self-reference, so we think about basically what metamodernism is, and what the alt-right is, the meta-right, or whatever this term I put together, is that it kind of clarifies the relationship between language and aesthetics. Like, postmodernism, all language, linguistic paradigm, Chomsky,
I know.
Linguistic deconstruction.
And that's why I never liked any of it, because it was a word game.
It's a total word game. So, yeah, and looking back, to be honest, anytime you start debating semantics, it's a good sign that your theory's all washed out.
You're playing a game within a game within a game.
Exactly.
You're not using common sense.
Exactly.
You're just talking rhetoric.
Right. You're going in circles without acknowledging
logic, reality, because they deny reality so much.
Exactly. You're claiming. You're going in circles while claiming that you're actually walking in a straight line, and you're not. Whereas hypermodernism was, all aesthetic. I said skeuomorphic reality. You think about like Japanese waifu nationalism,
That's
memes.
Right.
Exactly. That's what I used to describe the alt-right. I began to realize, that really wasn't the end. And the reason I took those cues was from these traditionalist types in the alt-right. They're like, oh, we want to go back to traditionalism, pre-modernism, the Orthodox Church. They love those, those aesthetics. What I noticed about those people is that they love. It was kind of a quandary. They love 1980s retrofuturism.
The 80s Italio disco.
Exactly.
It's funny, in the 80s,
they found it very
They
peaceful.
hated Roger Lynn's The Lynn Drum because it was mimicking an actual drummer.
Right.
And they would ruin the drummers in the business, no more Beatles. But then you got like Tears for Fears and Depeche Mode and New Order and all these other new wave synth pop bands coming in. And in the 80s it was a shock because electronic music. And now we have EDM music, and that's what all the degenerates listen to. But again, electronic music has that place. Like you said, there's that the Italio disco. People miss it now. They had grunge in the 90s, and then they had this something in 2000s, but now if you look and remember the 80s music of synthesizer and electronics, people seem to like that. It's like the fast wave thing.
Exactly. And that dovetails very kind of beautifully. It's not a coincidence with the Italian futurist aesthetic foundations of fascism. I mean, there was a back and forth between the German philosophers. I mean, I don't know if there's a crisscross, but the Italians were definitely doing the aesthetic side. The Germans between Stirner, Nietzsche, and there was one more, Hegel, but he predates fascism. There was some recursion back and forth. So jumping back to what I was doing, I began to realize aesthetics was not the end because there was something going on with this traditionalist movement. And they wanted traditionalism, but yet they loved this 1980s retrofuturism. And I developed a term for it. I call 1980s futurism Electro Industrialism. Some people use the term electric universe.
Electro-industrial, that sounds like some niche band like Knights or Ebb or something like that.
Like from Portland or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, and some people use that term electric universe, which is more like a theory of the reality of where the universe came from. But yeah, I use this term electro-industrialism to describe, think about like Sega arcade games, very 1980s retro-futuristic. And it was common knowledge that these traditionalists loved that, and they couldn't even explain it. You take like some of these flash wave images, they love it. These.
It seems to me just the whole chill wave or neon Indian thing, but then you just take a speech by Richard Spencer and you put it over it like a tag. If we're talking about music genres, such music genres that are popular today are bands as One O Tricks Point Never. Yeah. Because what he does is, it's SoundCloud based.
Right.
What you do in a SoundCloud is you see the file. You get to skip it. The song doesn't start and end. They're just beats or vibes, and you go back and forth. And so with Fashwave, what you're doing is, I like this because I like the alt-right. I don't care about the context if it's musical enough. I just like it because of the aesthetic reasons. And that's very interesting to think about in music terminology.
Exactly. And in kind of helping the traditionalists, so to speak, reconcile what the heck was going on. Because it was just cognitively or aesthetically, it was not a conundrum at all. Like, they knew it was, but aesthetically it didn't seem to be one. Like, they were happy, they're very peaceful looking at these flash wave images, even though really what they wanted to go back to was 1800s church aesthetics or whatever. I began to realize that there was something after hypermodernism, and that was understanding the relationship, explaining the relationship or reconciling language and aesthetics. Whereas the alt-right was a more hypermodern movement, which was completely steamrolling postmodernism with amazing aesthetics, or hyperrealism, a skeuomorphic view of the world. I began to realize that there was, the alt-right was eventually going to have to hit the big time, meaning they're going to eventually be responsible for the whole shebang or whatever. I mean, including the Marxists and including the traditionalists and the various right-wing factions, proprietarianism, new writers, high writers, libertarians, paleo-libertarians, libertarian nationalists, national capitalists, and of course, the Nazi LARPers who come in and annoy white people by telling everyone, well, you got to be like this.
There's also some problem, too, that politics today is a cosplay event. That we've now seen people who learn about stuff on the internet come IRL in a police-regulated place where, you dress up like a costume. Now, it's weird. This is problematic for the traditional left, because we now see a rise of Antifa.
Right.
Now, if you're a cool kid, you say Antifa. But if you're in English, you say Antifa. But the Antifa, they had their battle for Seattle back in 96 or 1999.
Yeah,
but they're coming again because they feel that that Nazism or the alt-right is like a virus, a sickness that needs to be whack-the-mold back in. Yeah. But the Antifa crowd, they're all old. They don't have millennials on their side. And the only millennials seem to be Seamster Punkster kids into some punk rock shows you might see in Philadelphia at their house, and that's their only recruits. They say no platform for fascists and no community. They're just taking anarchist rhetoric. Their audiences are getting smaller.
Exactly, and in my time with the ANCOM group and talking with them, and I didn't know what I was just the guy who wore the Donald Trump cap out of jest, and things actually went downhill when he won, because they were okay with me because they thought it was a total joke, which it was, but then he won and they all blamed me, so I had to leave. Only person of color I had to leave the ANCOM group, pretty much the only person, they were like colors, but what I've noticed is that not only just the it seems like their explanation of fascism and Marxism explanation of everything, but it's most notably fascism. It has always been material. Do you know what I mean? Like their explanation of why fascism exists, why people are attracted to the alt-right, there is no metaphysical accounting whatsoever.
It's a sickness.
Yeah, they just think.
But Foucault said it perfectly in the beginning of Deleuze's book in Guattari, where he says, "Fascism is everywhere. Fascism is there, like a disease."
Yeah, it's as if you're doing Marxism wrong or something. You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, or materialism wrong, or whatever. Like, they just cannot escape a material explanation of why. It's like, oh, here's a pie, you're a fascist, oh, you want the whole pie for yourself. As if there's no other reason why you could possibly adopt fascism. And the thing is that I find that Marxism poorly accounts for. I put the status up the other day. I said Marxism does not explain the Übermensch, and fascism doesn't realize its potential. Fascism is fascism came out of individualist anarchism, which itself came out of left anarchism. Long story, but Stirner would have been the individual. There's a little back and forth with him and Nietzsche. I think Nietzsche actually came after him. But Stirner created the concept of the Übermensch, and which actually leads us to a disturbing conclusion that Bain is the real Superman. But yeah, in his because Bob Siegel, who wrote the American Superman, wrote him as a Kantian hero, a total discontinuity from Superman's feels so, and that's why Superman feels so fake in postmodernism.
Well, he's a fascist, man. He's Superman, right?
Yeah,
it made sense back then in the comic books today, or even Batman, how goofy he is.
Yeah,
Batman, but yeah, Superman. It's really weird. How can you say such a thing?
Yeah, it's like Superman can't even fight postmodernism. Superman is I don't know.
They're trying to do Wonder Woman because, well, he's non-white cisgender. It's a woman, and she's powerful.
Yeah.
And the man is like black and Muslim, too, like they did with Miss Marvel.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess I found that metamodernism, and I guess we're hopping around a little bit, but I found that metamodernism, I could use it to clarify the relationship between language and aesthetics, essentially. Because I realized that, look, we live in a material reality. I can't just keep Evola style forcing everyone into this cult of aesthetics. The fact of the matter is, not everyone is aesthetic. And, we live in a physical, material world. People have to eat. People have to, reconcile their metaphysical with their physical. And language is a paradigm for physical reality. If aesthetic is the paradigm for the metaphysical, and so the kind of what is the relationship between language and aesthetics, and that's why I put together this meta right or this meta movement, meta modernism, and it's a long story, but if you Google meta modernism, you'll get a postmodern definition because there are meta modern scholars. Meta modernism is supposed to be in postmodernism. It's supposed to be a differentiation of postmodernism. Now, we go much farther than that here in the meta right. And what the argument is that fascism began as it was started by the Italians, pretty much. Philosophically, you could argue it was started by the Germans, organizationally, politically, whatever. But, fascism, as it was consolidated, was done by the Italians and the Italian futurists. And what I believe they saw, or what we're holding that they saw, is it was a critique of Western philosophy as a whole. What they saw was that, and of course, Italians and culture is very aesthetic. It was what we're positing is that fascism is an aesthetic critique that argues that Western aesthetics find their linguistical explanation in Eastern Oriental philosophies. And that if we reify back and forth between Western aesthetics, like classical aesthetics, pre-modern aesthetics, whatever, and reify between Western aesthetics and Eastern mythologies.
I always thought Martin Heidegger was just trying to resurrect the East into a Western system. That's how you explain time and being.
Exactly. And I have a feeling that Mussolini, in his sort of meatheadedness or whatever, because he was more of a, you know what I mean? Yeah, this guy was no Stirner. was no. But the Italians are very aesthetic, and he saw that there was a disconnect between Western philosophy and Western aesthetics, and that Western aesthetics could be more completely encapsulated by Eastern mythologies or Eastern paradigms of reality. And what we began to do is we've been working the whole summer. It's me going back and forth with a bunch of people, white Hinduists. We have a lot of people, 8 people so far. There's a person who does nothing but what Kurt Doolittle does, which is kind of empirical scientism. That's the way Kurt expresses himself. People call it autism, but there's actually a term. It's logical positivism, but it's positivism expressed in a very specific way, and that it's called scientism. And so we have not a scientist, a science, whatever.
Someone who writes in the proprietarian way, like Kurt Doolittle.
Exactly. So he goes over all my stuff, and he's an esoteric proprietarian, which means he doesn't agree with Kurt's view of consciousness, and because I find it a little limited what Kurt does.
Well, Kurt Doolittle, what I understand, he's all about trust.
Yeah.
He's all about the exchange of trust.
Exactly.
And Western people may trust, and you have to uphold Western civilization, so trust can be. Again, it's something like that.
Exactly.
He's really into the trust.
He's very good with that. He's very good with establishing the commons, reciprocity. I'll tell you, he would make a great. If I wanted somebody to work out a relationship with North Korea, America's relationship with Arabs in the Middle East, I would entrust Kurt Doolittle with pulling. And the English have always been very good with that, extracting value statements from the English language. I mean, Benjamin Franklin, he had this theory. He said the only people. His theory of whiteness was, you got to be English. He said the Germans are, English is not native for them, they are not white. So, very fascinating, but what we're doing here in the meta-right, or the meta-modernism, is we're kind of establishing language's relationship with aesthetics, postmodernism's relationship with nihilism, metaphysical nihilism, the relationship of consciousness with which we believe is congruent with physical reality. They're one and the same. There is no consciousness, as far as we are concerned, human consciousness, without a material reality. That's what we're interested in really exploring. And what I believe is that there's a reason. Some of these early fascist administrators like Hitler and Mussolini might not have been super bright, but there was a reason Hitler was fascinated with Hinduism. There was a reason for that. And they were just completely dissatisfied with any kind of linear or material explanation, linguistical explanation of reality. And they took Western aesthetics and they ran into the East philosophically. And Hitler's tie-up with Japan, bunch of things. And what I want to do is kind of understand reality as a sort of self-reference between linear time and cyclical time, where linear time is sort of, or consciousness or material reality, is a sort of linearization of cyclical time. And I have a blurb, I have a write-up that I can message you. You can read through it. But we believe that we have what I call fractal monarchism, or self-referencing authoritarianism, where every man a king would actually become a functional system. We believe that there are 3 types of metas, or 3 types of self-reference. There's duality, there's congruence, and there's an inverse-obverse system. And that the meta-right, or fractal monarchism, can solve. So these 3 types of self-reference exist in all contexts, all meta contexts. For example, organizational dynamics. That is a broad context, or a meta context. And any kind of meta contexts have 3 self-references, or three conditions that need to be met, or 3 vulnerabilities. And that is congruence. The condition of congruence needs to be met. The condition of duality needs to be met, and the condition of there needs to be an inverse-obverse relationship within there. And I had a diagram up. Like I said, I can send you the whole document.
Yes.
But we believe that the meta right will, in terms of congruence, it will unite the meta right, which is kind of individualist monarchism, with meta rights, which is the right of all people to live freely. So we're uniting in the congruence aspect. We're uniting meta right, which is a right wing, with meta rights, which is a left wing concept of everyone. These are the universal rights, because Marxism has not worked out yet a universal set of rights that everyone has. So we're uniting the meta right with the meta rights, with the concept of meta rights in Marxism, and that's our congruence aspect. We have a duality aspect, which is since the meta right is a bit of an anarchist, it's a bit of a self-referencing anarchy or monarchy. We're uniting left-wing monarchism. Left-wing anarchy and right-wing anarchy, which is there's a term for that. It's called in the anarchist system. It's called anarchic synthesis, and we unite that in we call it recursive synthesis, recursive or self-referencing synthesis, and that is our kind of our dualistic aspect, the left-wing and the left-wing anarchy and the right-wing anarchy. And then we have an inverse-obverse component, which is the unity of language and aesthetics, or can they have an inverse-obverse relationship, or the term I've also used is Zionism and a totalitarian democracy, or anarcho-monarchism. And so those are our three unities. Meta right and meta rights are rights for the individual, congruent with rights for the state, or the polity. The congruence between individual rights and polity rights for the body politic. A duality, a harmonic duality between left-wing anarchism and right-wing anarchism in terms of an anarchic synthesis, and the union between language and aesthetics. So
that's interesting. Well, we came across the hour of it, and okay. I know I wanted to keep this interview in an hour, and there's a lot to explain on the meta right, and you can only tell so much in an hour, and I think we did a lot, talked through this discussion within an hour. But is there anything else you'd like to say about the meta right product and what you plan on doing in the future with it?
Yeah, honestly, I'm amazed. It feels like we talked for like 3 hours.
But it's only been an hour, so much we can do in some time. Well, my thing I think is interesting is because I was thinking to myself, maybe Asian Aryanism could fit as a byproduct of hypermodernism or meta right. And
absolutely.
I'm using only in my words.
Absolutely.
Maybe you would have better words to describe it. I tell this to everyone, I'm only using my own environment to describe things.
Exactly.
And I always feel like I need a lawyer or someone better.
Yeah.
And I think maybe your stuff, there could be a place where Asian Aryanism fits
Absolutely. I think, just like Harlan Benison has his whole take called the acid right.
Or we used to call it alt-left with Brandon Avison and On Stark Truth, but then again, alt-left is... It's a hard term, right?
Yeah, Trump came and mangled it, to be honest.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would have, honestly, I used to even tell people...
I was flirting with that until it got ruined recently.
Yeah, exactly, I'll tell you. Because, I would even tell the alt-right, I said, I think I'm kind of alt-left, meaning I just have a very meta...
But now it means Antifa.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, the better term for them is control left, CTRL left. But, agreed. So my take on Asian Aryanism is that the aesthetics aspect of it, absolutely hypermodernism. I think a serious case, because David Duke the other day, he jumped on my page and he said Kashif Vikaas is fake news because he's in the group. So I tag him occasionally. And he used to respond. I think he's let off a little bit. But basically, white nationalism 1.0 is going to have to accept the Asian aesthetics. There's a reason why postmodernism doesn't really impact Asian culture. Asian culture is just very aesthetic, but it's expressed in their metaphysical philosophy, not so much in their Western classical art.
Well, it's also true. I mean, I don't mean to sound like some kind of Kalergi plan in effect, but it seems to me that the upper class of whites seem to be having strong intermarriages with other Asians.
Yeah.
And the multicultural paradigm seems... You often see pictures of mulatto children, white and black. Well, the unfortunate truth is it seems to be a white and Asian bicultural union that's happening. And a very strong... Penn would be a good example.
Exactly. It is a good example. And I think, as far as how Asian Aryanism, what attributes does, of hypermodernism and metamodernism does Asian Aryanism contain? The answer is the aesthetic aspect of it, the acceptance of the aesthetic philosophy. That is very hypermodern. And, you can see Western cultures is drifting towards that, where there's a lot of people that support Trump just for the kicks, just for the aesthetic subversion of postmodernism. They have really nothing they agree with.
Well, Donald Trump's like the wrecking ball hatred against everything.
Exactly. You're like, I don't agree with anything, but hey, you're screwing over...
Political correctness has got to go.
Yeah.
Voting Trump.
You're screwing over the linguistic paradigm of reality. I'm down. Sign me up. So 4chan army. Whatever. So 4chan nationalism. Where the metamodernism aspect lies, and this is, again, something that 1.0 white nationalists are going to have to come to terms with, is the organizational component. It would be the synthesis aspect, the fact that Europeans are bringing in a language component, and the Asians are bringing in a aesthetic component. What I mean is any kind of union, any kind of organizational union between Europeans and Asians, that falls outside of, other than the metaphysical. Yeah, metaphysical, it's very aesthetic, but any kind of IRL relationship like that, that's very metamodern. What I mean is, it's jumping back out of the metaphysical, out of the aesthetic, and it's become IRL. It's become physical, which is a linguistic paradigm. So
we're learning things on the internet, and internet's becoming a reality where we learn things from the internet. And like I said, the cosplay events, political realities where we want to be the anime character, and we're trying to force it upon other people.
Exactly. I feel that your kind of podcast very much focuses on the aesthetic coincidence as you see the value systems, the shared value systems. And I think that is very, very...
I just want people to wake up and
wake up to the potential.
Be honest. People are not honest today. They want to sleep under nihilism, or they want the good life. Yeah. But this good life is not productive to being an adult. They just want to sleep. And I think my duty is to wake up people and see the potential and let them know that this is real. Otherwise, they're living a lie life. It's, this is a battle between truth and authenticity, and it needs, because if it's not true, then it's nihilism.
Exactly. So once that union goes beyond the aesthetic, it's just going to recurse back into real life, which means actual political organization, with Asians and whites realizing, wait a minute, we have shared identitarian interests.
That's right.
And that would be, you would have hit metamodernism pretty squarely. Because what goes metaphysical doesn't stay metaphysical. And it comes back, and it's going to impact the West. It's going to save the West. I mean, 1.0 white nationalism might not want to give Asians a whole lot of credit.
There definitely is criticisms.
Yeah, like a great example, to be honest, is, and I hate to counter-signal anyone, but Matt Parrott sometimes gives me the cold shoulder.
Well, he wanted to put me in an oven with Robert Stark. When Robert Stark had a podcast a few months ago, I was talking about gay anime. He said, "You and Robert are going to go in the oven." Yeah,
exactly.
Too.
Right.
He said that to me.
Exactly. The Traditionalist Workers' Party, their answer to everything is in an organizational context. But the fact of the matter is, the organizational does not solve the metaphysical. So hypermodernism, you go straight into aesthetic or metaphysical, and then you come back around, and you know what I mean. We can organize IRL. And Asians are pretty much going to be the tipping point that ends up saving the West. And those who don't acknowledge it, I don't like to impose myself on them. You don't have to acknowledge Asians. It's just it is what it is. It's going to happen, and we are happy to preserve any culture that is within our interests, and that would be, I want everyone to maximize their potential under meta-modernism or meta-right. And, it's coming. I mean, those white nationalists are just going to be left behind. I mean, they are going to lose their influence over the movement as a whole. They're going to be in the...
I have these same criticisms too, and we could talk about how... This is for another time, but talk about for how this crazy white nationalism, but also this hipster Nazism that's happening.
Exactly.
That I find really terrible too.
Exactly.
It's not just, they're going to have to change minds. It's, like you just said, perfect.
Exactly. So in closing, hypermodernism, which we're currently in, or alt-right, is 2.0. That's white nationalism 2.0. Metamodernism, which organizationally has
supposedly 3.0.
3.0. Right, exactly. That's the IRL realization of 2.0 aesthetics. Because in 2.0, you're seeing these aesthetic values shared between Europeans and then the Eastern philosophies, and then in meta-right or 3.0 metamodernism, it becomes real, and it's and in closing, you were saying, what were we taking this? To be really, really honest, I'm going to put myself out there. I just announced maybe a couple of days ago, and I talked with. I put it out on Facebook. I made an announcement that I'm going to run for president in 2020, just if nothing else, as a way to. So I'm putting it out on video now.
2020. That's some time. You got time.
I got time. Yeah, I'm going to put together my startup, get some money going. But I did talk to one of the 2.0s, Sako Vandal, who's he's the guy who made White Sharia or whatever. That's what he's famous for. But that kind of became the number one, probably the most offensive meme. And to be honest, I think it took the alt-right a couple of steps back.
Yeah. Well, it shows their hatred for white women in general, and just said, "Well, just go with Asians."
Exactly. I not a big. I
never care. I just think they're just telling the truth about the nation,
I don't really dig.
I
don't dig the way he expressed it. Because it's just whenever you drop a white Sharia bomb into an alt-right conversation, it just immediately you can just see the school of fishes. They divide.
Yeah,
everything becomes
and there's all the problems, but that's
exactly. So I don't. But he in IRL, he's a very pragmatic guy, and he said it'll be my running mate.
Oh.
So boom, there we go. Vikaas Vandal, and he'll be the. We'll have to drop that white Sharia law just because it gets people talking. I don't care. It makes the normies so mad, but then they realize, wait a minute. I was supporting actual Sharia just last year or whatever in the name of Thomas. But yeah, he'll be the white Sharia component, just to troll the normie, he'll be the white Sharia component. I'll be the I'll pull up the meta-nationalism component. So I'm meta-nationalist.
This will be exciting. I got to see this in 2022. But cool. I think we've had a good conversation.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. You're very conversant on these issues.